My husband shoved divorce paper at me. You are worthless. Changed my door code and moved this mistress to my bed. Hi, welcome to Family Revenge. Let's get into a completely new story.
My husband placed divorce papers in the middle of the dining table and said, "I don't need your money anymore." That same night, he erased my lock codes, brought his mistress into my bedroom, and his son hissed, "Get out," before throwing the wooden box that belonged to my late husband into the snow. I did not cry. I did not argue. I only smiled and walked outside. And 4 days later, when the police appeared at the front door, what they saw on the screen left the entire room frozen in silence, as if the air itself had stopped. To everyone watching right now, thank you for being here. It means something. Leave a comment below what city or country are you joining from today. Let's see how far this reaches. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to actual names or places is entirely coincidental, but the message it carries is one worth keeping. The candles had been burning for 40 minutes by the time Conrad finally sat down. I had set the table myself that evening, not because Martha wasn't available, but because I wanted to. 8 years of anniversaries in this house. 8 years of sitting across from the same man in the same chair in the dining room he had designed with my money and called his masterpiece. I poured the wine, I folded the napkins, I waited. The snow had started around 4 in the afternoon, the way it always does in Aspen in December, quietly at first, then all at once. By the time Conrad walked in, the windows were white and the wind was pressing against the glass like something trying to get inside. He didn't greet me. He set his phone face down on the table, pulled out his chair, and sat. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a stack of papers in the center of the table right between the candles and the wine. I looked at the papers. Then I looked at him. 8 years, Alara. His voice was calm, almost gentle. 8 years living in your shadow. My firm is worth 12 million now. I don't need your money. I don't need you. I didn't move. The dining room, every angle of it, every carefully chosen material had been Conrad's design. He'd spent 6 months on it, shown me renderings like a man presenting a gift. I had nodded, written the checks, and never once told him what I actually thought when I looked at it. I thought he didn't design this. Not really, but that was a thought for another day. "I want a divorce," he said. "The papers are already filed." From the other end of the table, Leo leaned back in his chair and smiled. Conrad's son from his first marriage, 19 years old, with his father's jawline and none of his father's restraint. "Finally," Leo said mostly to himself. I looked at the papers again. Neat. Organized. Someone had helped him with this. "Conrad," I started. "It's done," he said. "I've already had the smart locks updated. Your access codes have been removed from the system as of this afternoon." He said it the way someone might mention they'd changed the Wi-Fi password. Casual. Finished. Smart locks, the kind that run through an app. The kind I had installed in this house 3 years ago when Conrad was too busy to attend the security upgrade meeting. The kind he had never bothered to learn how to manage. Leo stood up. He walked to the sideboard, picked up the small wooden box I kept near the window, the one that held my late husband's watch, a silver Patek Philippe from 1962, and 3 photographs I had carried across 4 states and 2 decades. He walked to the balcony door, slid it open, and the cold came in like a blade. "Leo." My voice came out even. "Put that down." He looked at me over his shoulder. Or what? Then he dropped the box over the railing. I heard it hit the snow somewhere below. A small sound. Almost nothing. I sat very still. There are moments in life when the only honest response is silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because what you're feeling is too precise for words. I watched the balcony door swing in the wind, and I thought about that watch, about the man who wore it, about everything that box represented that Conrad had never once asked about in 8 years. Conrad walked to the coat closet and pulled out a suitcase. old, scuffed at the corners. He dropped it on the floor in front of me with a sound that echoed off the stone walls. "I had Martha pull some of your things together," he said. "The essentials." I looked at the suitcase, then at Conrad, then at Leo, who had come back inside and was pouring himself a glass of my wine. "That's it," Conrad said. "Nothing." I reached forward, picked up the divorce papers, and looked at them for a long moment. Then I set them back down. "Okay," I said. Conrad blinked. "That's all you have to say?" "That's all you deserve to hear." He stared at me like a man who had rehearsed a fight and found no one willing to throw a punch. Leo looked up from his wine, uncertain for the first time all evening. I stood, picked up the suitcase. It was lighter than I expected. A few clothes from the look of it, things I hadn't worn in years. He'd done this quickly, which meant he'd been planning it slowly. I buttoned my coat, walked to the front door. Behind me, I heard another door open softer from the hallway that led to the guest rooms. Heels on hardwood. A pause. "Is she leaving?" A woman's voice. Young. Composed. "She is," Conrad said, and I could hear the smile in it. I didn't turn around. I opened the front door. The cold hit me full in the face, sharp and clean and immediate. Snow was coming down hard, the kind that swallows sound, that makes the world feel smaller than it is. I stepped outside, pulled the door almost shut behind me, and then I stopped. I don't know exactly what made me look up. Some old instinct, maybe. The kind you develop when you've spent 30 years noticing the things other people overlook. I tilted my head and looked at the upper corner of the doorframe at the small dark lens mounted flush against the wood. The one Conrad had never noticed. The one I'd had installed 2 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon when he was in Denver for a client meeting. I smiled. Not for Conrad, not for the woman whose heels I could still hear on the other side of the door. Just for myself. Then I walked into the snow. Some nights snow doesn't fall to cover things up. It falls to make them clear. That was the kind of night it was. I had been driving for 11 minutes. I knew because I'd checked the clock when I pulled out of the garage, not out of habit, but because I track things. I always have. It's the part of me Conrad never understood and eventually resented. The road down from the estate was the only way in or out of that part of Aspen. Single lane in stretches carved along the edge of the mountain lined with nothing but pine and drop. In summer, it was beautiful. In December, in a storm, it was just a road you had to respect. I respected it. Both hands on the wheel. Exactly the right speed, not slow enough to seem afraid. Not fast enough to be reckless. The old suitcase sat on the back seat. Exactly where Conrad expected it to be. I was thinking about the watch. Not grieving it. Just noting the fact of it, the weight of that small wooden box, the way it had sailed over the railing without a sound until it hit the snow below. Leo had done it without hesitation. That told me something I'd already suspected but needed confirmed. The boy wasn't conflicted. He had chosen his side long before tonight. My phone rang. I knew who it was before I looked. Ethan. Mom. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath, the kind he'd been carrying since he was 24 years old and first told me what he'd seen. I watched the whole thing, the dining room feed the balcony camera. "Are you all right?" "I've been all right for 2 years, Ethan." A beat of silence. "He actually did it." "He did." Leo threw the box. "He did." "Mom, that watch belonged to Ethan." I kept my eyes on the road. "I don't need a moment right now. I need a status report." I heard him exhale that particular exhale of his, the one that means he wants to say something else but has learned not to. He got that from me. He'd never admit it. "Patricia has everything on standby," he said. "I called her 20 minutes ago when Conrad started laying out those papers. She's been at her desk. Ready." Patricia Wren, my attorney for 19 years. The woman who had drafted every significant contract I'd ever signed, including one Conrad had never read carefully enough. She didn't sleep much, Neither did I. Miller, I asked. Confirmed for Friday. He has everything you sent last month. His words were, and I wrote this down. I've been waiting 3 years for this call. Good, I said. He's earned the patience. Silas says all 24 feeds are live, 4K audio and video. He activated the secondary system an hour ago when the lock codes changed. A pause. He's already inside. I nodded once, to no one. Is it time? Ethan asked. He just made his first move, I said. Now it's ours. I'll stay at the Denver office. I can be on the road in under 3 hours if you need me on site before Friday. Stay where you are. Don't call again unless I reach out first. Understood. A shorter pause this time. Mom. The watch. I'm sorry about don't be. I meant it. It was an object. What it represented isn't gone because Leo threw it in the snow. Ethan didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had dropped. Are you sure you don't want me to drive up tonight? I'm sure. Okay. He believed me. He always knows when I'm telling the truth, always has since he was old enough to know the difference. Call me when you're settled. I will. I ended the call. The road curved left ahead, and through the gap in the trees, I caught a glimpse of the estate up on the ridge. The lights were still on all of them. Dining room, master bedroom. The guest suite on the east side where Bianca had presumably already moved her things. Conrad moved fast when he thought he'd won. He always had. I pulled the car to the side of the road, sat with the engine running and the heater going and the snow pressing against the windshield in long, slow sheets. From here, the house looked the way it always had from a distance, impressive, isolated, permanent, like something that had always been there and always would be. Conrad believed that too. He was wrong about most things. I looked at the clock. 11:19 p.m. Friday was still 5 days away. 5 days for Conrad to celebrate. 5 days for him to call people, rearrange furniture, let Bianca pick which side of the bed she preferred. 5 days to become more certain by the hour that he had solved the problem of his marriage cleanly, finally, on his own terms. He would need every one of those days to reach the precise level of overconfidence I required him to have on Friday morning. I put the car in reverse, turned around on the narrow road with the patience that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. Started back up the mountain, not fast, not dramatic, just a woman driving back toward her house. Because that's what it was. My house, my name on the deed, my signature on the mortgage, my money in the foundation. Conrad had deleted my profile from the smart lock app Quick Clean Final, the way you delete a contact from your phone when you've decided the relationship is over. He didn't know about the other way in. He didn't know about a lot of things. I parked in the lower service lot behind the utility shed in the blind spot between the 2 cameras Conrad had installed 3 years ago and believed were the only cameras on the property. I turned off the headlights, sat in the dark. The snow had slowed. The storm was spending itself the way storms do eventually, and what was left fell quietly without urgency. The mountain absorbed it. I sat there for 2 minutes, not hesitating, just waiting for my eyes to adjust fully to the dark before I moved. Then I reached back, released the trunk latch, and stepped out into the cold. I didn't go to the suitcase. I went to the left corner of the trunk underneath the emergency kit I'd repacked on a Tuesday afternoon 3 weeks ago, when Conrad was in Denver for a client presentation. I lifted the kit out and set it in the snow. Underneath it was a waterproof black case roughly the size of a hardcover book, matte finish, no markings. I'd placed it there myself. I knew exactly what was in it. I knew exactly what it was for. I picked it up, felt the weight of it in my gloved hand. Then I turned toward the house and walked forward through the snow. Conrad designed every room in this house, every ceiling height, every sight line, every material choice from the Italian limestone in the entryway to the reclaimed oak on the 3rd floor. He spent 18 months on the blueprints. He called it his finest work. He said it to clients, to journalists, to anyone who would listen. He never designed the basement, because as far as Conrad Thorne knew, this house didn't have one. The garage entrance was around the back of the property, accessible from a service path that ran along the north side of the estate. Conrad used the garage twice in 8 years, both times to store furniture he'd bought, and then decided he didn't like. He'd never once touched the tool rack along the east wall. Never noticed that it sat 6 inches further from the wall than it should have. Never thought to ask why. I set the black case down on the concrete floor, reached behind the third shelf from the bottom, and pressed the recessed panel flush against the wall. A soft click. Then a seam appeared in the drywall floor to ceiling 18 inches wide. The door swung inward on hydraulic hinges, silent. I picked up the case and walked through. Silas had built this 2 years ago on 4 separate Tuesdays, when Conrad was in Denver for client work. He'd brought in a 2-man crew, worked in 4-hour windows, and left no invoice trail. The room was 14 feet by 12, climate-controlled, soundproof to the standard used in recording studios. I stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind me. The screens came on automatically, motion-activated, keyed to my biometrics. 24 feeds arranged across 3 monitors, each one covering a different section of the house. Living room, kitchen, dining room, master bedroom, guest suite, hallways, the front entrance, the balcony where Leo had stood an hour ago. Every feed was live. Every feed was recording. I set my coat over the back of the chair, sat down, and looked at the center monitor. Conrad and Bianca were in the living room. He'd opened the champagne, a bottle I'd been saving since 2019, and was pouring 2 glasses. Bianca was standing by the fireplace in a silk blouse I'd never seen before, running her fingers along the edge of the mantel like she was taking inventory. I picked up my phone and called Silas. He answered on the first ring. "You're in." "I'm in," I said. "Run me through the system." All 24 feeds are live, audio and video, 4K resolution on every camera. His voice was unhurried. Silas didn't do urgency unless something was actually wrong. Recording to the encrypted server as of 40 minutes ago. Nothing Conrad does in that house from this point forward is off the record. The back door on the smart lock system, still active. When Conrad deleted your profile from the app tonight, he removed your standard user account. What he doesn't know is that there's a second account administrator level, 1 tier above his own, that I installed when we set up the original system 3 years ago. He can't see it. He can't delete it. And it gives you full remote access to every lock in the house. I looked at the screen. Conrad handed Bianca a glass. She smiled at something he said. "He never found it. He never looked," Silas said. "Most people don't think to check for what they don't know exists." Of course he didn't. I leaned back in the chair. "How long until the recording timestamps are legally authenticated?" "Already done. I routed them through the third-party verification server before you even left the dining room. Every frame has a certified timestamp that holds up in federal court." That was why I'd hired Silas. Not because he was fast, because he thought 3 steps ahead and then documented all of them. "The provisions?" I asked. "Left wall, steel cabinet, 2 weeks of dry goods and water. The medical kit is on the second shelf. There's a clean change of clothes in the locker on your right. I had Martha handle that part last week." Martha, my housekeeper of 12 years who had watched Conrad walk past her every morning for 8 years without learning her last name. Who had agreed to this arrangement without hesitation and without asking for an explanation, because she was the kind of woman who understood things without needing them spelled out. "How long are you planning to stay in there?" Silas asked. 4 days. Maybe less if he moves faster than expected." "And if he's smarter than you think?" "He's not." A pause. Not skepticism. Silas didn't do skepticism either. Just the silence of a man who'd learned to trust my read on people. "The case you pulled from the car," he said. "You have everything you need. Everything. Then you're set." Another beat. "Mrs. Vance?" "For what it's worth, what he did tonight with the watch. Martha told me about the watch." "Silas." "Yes?" "I appreciate that. But right now, I need you off the line. I have things to watch. Understood. I'm 20 minutes out if anything goes wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. I ended the call and set the phone face up on the desk. On the center monitor, Conrad had moved to the couch. He was relaxed, legs crossed, jacket off, the kind of ease that only comes when a man believes he's already won. Bianca sat beside him close, her head tilted toward his shoulder. She said something. He laughed. I watched them. There is a particular kind of patience that most people mistake for passivity. They see a woman who doesn't react, and they think she has no response. They don't understand that some responses take time to build, that the most precise ones always do. I had been building mine for 2 years. Tonight was simply the night it began to execute. On the screen, Conrad reached forward and set his champagne glass on the coffee table. My coffee table. Then he picked up his phone. He opened an app. I recognized the interface immediately. I'd used the same banking platform for years before I moved our joint accounts to a separate structure 18 months ago. He was navigating to the Vance Thorne family trust account. The one he'd had management access to for the past 2 years. The one he believed was his strongest leverage. He typed something. Paused. Typed again. Bianca leaned over to look at the screen. She said something I couldn't quite make out. The audio on that camera was partially obscured by the fireplace, but I saw her expression. Satisfied. Expectant. Conrad nodded once. Then he pressed send. I looked at the number on my own screen, the transaction monitor Silas had set up to mirror the trust account in real time. The amount appeared immediately. $4.2 million. Transferred to an account registered to Thorne Architecture Group, LLC. I sat with that for a moment. Then I opened the encrypted message thread and typed 4 words to Ethan. He just did it. 3 seconds later, Ethan replied, IRS flag triggered. Confirmed. I set the phone down. On the monitor, Conrad raised his glass again toward Bianca. He was smiling the way men smile when they think the hard part is over. It was just beginning. There's something deeply strange about watching people celebrate with your wine in your house while you're sitting directly beneath them. Not painful, not infuriating. Strange the way a fever dream is strange, where everything looks familiar but the proportions are slightly wrong. I had built this house into what it was. Every renovation, every contractor, every fixture selected from a catalog at a kitchen table at 11 at night. Conrad had lived in it. There's a difference, and I had always known it. I just hadn't said it out loud until now. I had been in the panic room for 40 minutes. The chair was comfortable. The temperature held at 68 degrees. On the center monitor, Conrad had moved the party from the living room to the kitchen, which meant he'd found the second bottle I kept above the refrigerator. Of course he had. 12 million. He was talking to Bianca, but he was performing for the room, for himself, for some imagined audience that existed somewhere just past the walls of the house. Do you understand what that means? 3 years ago, I was drawing spec houses in Boulder. Now I have contracts in 4 states. Bianca tilted her head. And Alara had nothing to do with that. Conrad waved his hand, the gesture of a man dismissing a footnote. She gave me seed capital. That's it. Any competent architect could have done what I did with that money. A pause. I just happened to be the one who did. I wrote that down. Verbatim. Timestamp 12:43 a.m. Your name is on 4 contracts in 4 states, Bianca said. She wasn't challenging him. She was locating herself, measuring the distance between what he was saying and what was actually true. That's not nothing. It's what I built, Conrad said. Not what she built. What I built. Bianca nodded slowly and said nothing else. She picked up her glass. Leo was on the couch, shoes off, working through his 3rd glass. He'd been quiet for 20 minutes, the particular quiet of someone doing arithmetic in their head, running numbers against a timeline, checking whether what he'd been promised still added up. When do I get my share of the firm, Dad? Conrad didn't look up from the champagne he was pouring. When you earn it. We had a deal. Leo's voice had dropped a register. Not angry. Something colder than anger, more deliberate. You said when the divorce was finalized we'd restructure. My name on the operating agreement. We'll talk about it. We're talking about it now. Conrad set the bottle down and looked at his son for the first time all evening. The look of a man who considered this conversation a distraction from something more important. Leo, tonight is not the night. You keep saying that, Leo said. 8 months you've been saying that. And in 8 months has anything I've told you not happened? Leo looked at him steadily. Not yet. The words sat there between them, 2 syllables carrying the specific weight of a conditional threat. Conrad heard it. I saw it in the slight adjustment of his posture. He heard it and filed it and chose not to respond to it tonight. We'll restructure after the papers are signed, Conrad said. That's still the plan. I want it in writing this time. You'll get it in writing. Before the 31st. Before the 31st, Conrad said. Now let it go. Leo let it go. He swirled his glass and looked at the floor and let it go the way someone lets something go when they have already decided what they'll do if it isn't delivered. I wrote that down too. Bianca stood up from the bar stool, smooth, unhurried, the movement of someone who has learned that the best exits from a room are the ones that don't draw attention. Boys. She smiled at both of them with the patience of a woman who had seen this argument before and found it neither surprising nor interesting. We're celebrating, not renegotiating. She picked up her glass and moved toward the hallway. I'm going to find a better bathroom than the one on this floor. She disappeared from the kitchen feed. I switched to camera 4, the hallway. She appeared at the far end near the window. She had a phone in her hand. Not the iPhone she'd been holding all evening. A different one. Smaller. Darker. The kind you buy with cash at a convenience store and register to a name that doesn't belong to you. I leaned forward. Her back was to the camera. She typed. Waited. Typed again. The response came quickly. I could read the rhythm of it in the way her thumb moved the brief pause before she read the immediate reply. 3 exchanges in under 90 seconds. She slipped the second phone back into her jacket pocket and stood at the window for a moment looking out at the snow. Not thinking. Already decided. Just waiting for the right moment to act on whatever had just been confirmed. Then she went to the bathroom. I flagged the timestamp. 1:14 a.m. Opened a new note, second device. Unregistered. Consistent contact pattern. Rapid response, prearranged signal or standing thread. Check carrier. Check Leo's phone records for same window. I didn't know the full picture yet. But I had learned 30 years ago that the details you can't immediately explain are the ones that end up mattering most. Back in the kitchen, Conrad had refilled his glass and was leaning against the counter in the posture of a man delivering a verdict. She never believed in me. Not genuinely. She believed in her own judgment that she'd found a diamond in the rough, some project she could shape into something. He shook his head. She didn't shape anything. I built this myself. Leo looked at him over the rim of his glass. Did you? Conrad frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Leo swirled his wine. Just asking. The silence between them was brief and specific, the kind that happens when something lands closer to the truth than either person is ready to follow. Conrad let it pass. Leo didn't press it, but I noted the exchange because in my experience, the questions people ask as nothing are never nothing. By 1:30, Leo had gone to bed without saying goodnight. Conrad didn't notice. He was in the living room now, phone out, already performing for an audience that wasn't in the room. He walked upstairs, pushed open the door to the master bedroom, and stood in the middle of it the way a man stands in the middle of something he has just decided belongs to him. He raised his phone, took a picture. 30 seconds later, my monitoring alert fired. The post appeared on my secondary screen, my bedroom, my dresser, my window with the mountain view framed in winter dark. Caption: new chapter. I screenshotted it with the metadata intact. Timestamp, geolocation, account ID, platform log. In a Colorado property dispute, a post of that nature. Geotagged to a residence the poster does not legally own is the kind of exhibit that makes a judge's expression go flat and professional. I saved it, labeled it, added it to the folder that was already 43 items deep. Conrad came back downstairs. The adrenaline was metabolizing, I could see it in the drag of his step. The way he sat on the couch and loosened his collar like a man who had done the work he came to do and was only now allowing himself to feel the weight of the evening. He opened his laptop. The trust account portal reflected in the window glass behind him just enough of the interface visible to confirm what I was seeing. He had already transferred the money once tonight. I had assumed that was the move, one clean transfer, structured and deliberate. Deal with the paperwork later. But Conrad, sitting in my living room at 2:47 in the morning with half a bottle of champagne in him and no one left to perform for, had decided once wasn't enough. He was logging in again. I sat up straight. At 2:47 a.m., Conrad Thorne opened the Vance Thorne Family Trust account for the second time. His fingers moved with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed this, who had decided, somewhere between the Instagram post and the bottom of the second bottle, that the first transfer hadn't taken enough. He was going back for more. I picked up my phone and typed 2 words to Silas. "He's back." The reply came in 4 seconds. "Watching. Timestamp locked." I once told a graduate student that money always leaves a trail. The smart ones know how to read it. The reckless ones don't know they're leaving it. Conrad Thorne was leaving the longest trail of his life, and he was doing it at 3 in the morning in his pajamas on a laptop that was reflecting off the window glass of a house he didn't own. I watched him work. The trust account interface was familiar to me. I'd used the same portal for years before restructuring our joint finances 18 months ago. I knew exactly what each screen meant, which buttons led where, how long each transfer confirmation took to process. I watched Conrad navigate it the way someone drives a road they think they know, confident, not quite careful enough. He typed in the routing number, the account number, the amount. Not 4.2 million this time, 380,000, cleaner, rounder. The kind of number that looks like a scheduled payment rather than a grab. Smarter than the first transfer, which told me someone had coached him, or he'd had time to think between glasses of champagne. Either way, it didn't matter. He hit confirm. The screen flashed green. 4 seconds later, my phone vibrated against the desk. The notification was clean and automated. No sender name, just a system flag I'd had Silas configure 8 months ago. Tied directly to the FinCEN monitoring protocol that Patricia had helped me establish through proper legal channels. IRS flag triggered. Wire transfer detected. Case file VT-2024-1213. Formal review initiated. I read it once. Set the phone face down. Then I picked it back up and opened the message thread with Silas. Both transfers flagged. I typed, "Confirm the paper trail runs clean to his personal account." His reply came in under a minute, already confirmed. First transfer at 11:52 p.m., second at 3:04 a.m. Both routed from the Vance Thorne Family Trust to Thorne Architecture Group, LLC. His name is the sole signatory on the LLC. IRS has the incorporation documents, the account history, and the SAR we filed in October. They'll open formal proceedings Monday morning. I typed back, "Make sure the trail leads them straight to his personal account, not just the LLC. It already does. He structured it that way himself. The LLC is a pass-through, one signatory. No partners, no corporate shield. Every dollar that went in is traceable directly to Conrad Thorne personal taxpayer ID." I set the phone down again. He always does the hard work for me. I sent that last line to Silas more as an observation than a message. He replied with a single word consistently. For those who don't follow financial law closely, what Conrad had just done was not simply moving money. He was the court-appointed co-trustee of the Vance Thorne Family Trust, which meant he had a legal obligation called a fiduciary duty, a responsibility to manage trust assets for the benefit of the trust, not for personal gain. Transferring trust funds into his own company's account was a direct violation of that duty. Under federal law, it qualified as wire fraud. Under Colorado state law, it was also theft by fiduciary. And because he'd done it twice in one night across state banking lines, the federal jurisdiction was automatic. The SAR suspicious activity report that Patricia had filed with FinCEN back in October had been the setup. It put Conrad's account under passive monitoring. The moment those transfers went through the system flagged them without any human intervention required. No phone calls, no tipping anyone off, just a quiet, automated tripwire that Conrad had just walked straight through. On the monitor, Conrad closed his laptop. He sat back against the couch cushions, arms spread wide, the posture of a man who had just finished something he was proud of. He looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he smiled small. Private satisfied the smile of someone who believes they've gotten away with something. He reached for his glass. Empty. He looked at it with mild disappointment, set it down. And within 4 minutes his head had dropped to the side, and his breathing had slowed. Just like that, Conrad Thorne was asleep. I watched him for a moment. There was something almost peaceful about it, the way he'd settled into the couch that cost $11,000. In the living room, he'd spent 6 months designing. In the house he'd convinced himself he'd earned. Above him, somewhere on the second floor, Bianca was in my bed. Down the hall, Leo was sleeping off the better part of a bottle of Burgundy. Everyone in this house believed the story was over. I turned off the secondary monitors, kept only the hallway feeds and the front entrance active, and moved to the cot in the corner. It wasn't the most comfortable thing I'd ever slept on, but I've slept on worse in worse circumstances with higher stakes than this. I lay down, pulled the wool blanket up. The ceiling was 1.5 meters above my face. Directly above me, through the concrete and the subflooring and the reclaimed oak Conrad had sourced from a mill in Tennessee, was my bedroom. My bed. The one I'd bought the year after my first husband died because I needed something that felt like it was only mine. Bianca was sleeping in it right now. I thought about that for exactly 3 seconds. Then I closed my eyes. I slept well. I always sleep well when the next move is already in motion, and all I have to do is wait. Tomorrow, Ethan would call, and the day after that, and on the 4th morning, everything that Conrad Thorne believed he had built for himself would come apart, not with drama, not with noise, but with the quiet, inevitable precision of a trap that had been waiting 2 years to close. I was ready. The house was quiet above me. I slept. I was awake before the phone rang. Not because I'd slept badly, I hadn't. The cot was narrow and the blanket was thin and the room smelled like concrete and climate-controlled air. And I slept 6 solid hours without dreaming. I was awake because at 6:58 in the morning I heard movement on the monitor above me. Bianca, from the sound of it, heels on hardwood. The kind of sound that doesn't belong at that hour in a house where you're supposedly a guest. I made a note, checked the feed. Then I sat up, folded the blanket, and waited. At exactly 7 o'clock my phone rang. Ethan. On time as always. My son had been punctual since he was 7 years old when he decided that being late was a form of disrespect, and held to that position for the next 25 years without exception. I used to tease him about it. I hadn't teased him about much in the past 2 years. Morning, I said. Morning. His voice was clear, he'd been up for a while. How'd you sleep? Fine. In a concrete room under your own house. It's climate-controlled. A short pause. The kind that means he wants to say something and is deciding whether to. Okay. Status update. Go ahead. Patricia received the full package last night, the UV contract, the IRS documentation, Silas's authenticated recordings through midnight. She's reviewed everything. Her words were airtight. Which, coming from Patricia, means she's genuinely satisfied and not just managing your expectations. Patricia Wren didn't manage expectations. She assessed them. There was a difference, and it mattered. Miller, I asked. Confirmed for Friday morning. He has everything you couriered him in October: the financial records, the timeline, the trust documentation. He said, and I'm quoting directly here, "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to give me something I could actually use." Inspector Daniel Miller had been with Aspen PD for 19 years. He'd watched Conrad's firm expand, watched the contracts multiply, watched a mid-tier architect from Boulder become the name on every luxury development in western Colorado faster than the math supported. Miller was the kind of man who noticed when math didn't add up. He just hadn't had the paperwork to act on it. Until now. "Ryan," I asked. "Ready." The article is written, edited, and sitting in a queue at the Denver Post. Ryan's been holding it for 6 weeks. Ethan paused. "He wants you to know he's grateful. For the access and for Marcus." Ryan Holt was 34, an investigative reporter who'd been tracking Conrad's firm for 3 years on instinct and partial records. I'd reached out to him 14 months ago with a proposition. I would give him full documentation and an exclusive first source interview with Marcus Webb in exchange for a publication date I controlled. Ryan had agreed without hesitation. In his business, that kind of source access didn't come twice. "Marcus," I said. "Huh, signed the sworn affidavit 2 weeks ago." Ethan's voice shifted slightly, something careful in it. His NDA with Conrad had a 5-year term. It expired in September. The moment it lapsed, Marcus had no legal obligation to stay quiet, and once I showed him what Conrad had been doing with the trust funds, he stopped. He didn't need much convincing. Marcus Webb was 28 years old and one of the most genuinely talented architects I'd encountered in 30 years of funding development projects. Conrad had found him at 24, recognized what he had, and structured an agreement that extracted Marcus's work while erasing his name from it. It was efficient, and it was cruel, and it was exactly the kind of thing Conrad did when he believed no one was watching closely enough. "Good," I said. "Tell Ryan to hold until Friday morning. Not before. He knows. He's waiting on your word. He'll have it." A beat. "Mom." Ethan's voice changed again, less operational now. Something underneath it I recognized. "Are you really okay in there?" "I told you, I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." I looked at the monitor feed. Upstairs, Conrad had come down to the kitchen. He was in a robe making coffee, moving through my kitchen with the comfort of someone who had lived there for years, which technically he had. That didn't make it less strange to watch. "I'm exactly where I need to be," I said. "That's the most honest answer I can give you." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "The watch. Leo just threw it." "Yes." Without even... Ethan. I know you don't need... I don't, I said, not unkindly. "What I need is for Friday to go exactly the way we planned it. Everything else is noise." "Okay." He exhaled. "Okay." Another pause. Longer this time. I'd learned to read Ethan's silences the way you learn to read weather, by paying attention to what came before them. This one had a particular quality. Dense. Like something sitting on top of it. "Is there something else?" I asked. "Mom, He stopped. "Say it." "It's not. It can wait until tonight. I'll come up after dark through the service path. Silas already confirmed the route." "Ethan. Tonight. I promise." His voice was steady but careful, the way it gets when he's carrying something he's not ready to put down yet. "It's not about Friday. It's not about the plan. It's just something I should have said a long time ago." I didn't push. There are things that need to arrive in their own time, and forcing them early doesn't make them cleaner. I'd learned that lesson at considerable cost over the years. Whatever Ethan was holding, it had been with him for a while. I could hear the weight of it in the way he'd stopped himself twice now. "Tonight," I said. "Tonight. Come after 9, use the north path." "I know the path, Mom." "I know you do." We said goodbye. I set the phone on the desk and looked at the monitor. Conrad was reading something on his phone while his coffee brewed still in the robe, one hand resting on the counter. He looked rested, comfortable, like a man who had solved a problem and was enjoying the morning after. I knew that feeling. I just knew it from the other side. I thought about Ethan's voice. The pause. The weight behind the words he hadn't said yet. I had heard that specific tone once before 15 years ago, the night Ethan came home from a networking event in Denver. He'd walked in and sat down at the kitchen table and looked at me with an expression I hadn't known how to read. He'd said, "I met someone tonight you should know about. An architect. Conrad Thorne." And then something in his face had closed very slightly, like a door not quite shutting. I had asked him once 2 years later what that expression had been about. He'd said he wasn't sure. I had let it go. Tonight I wouldn't. The signal came at 11 on the dot. 3 short beeps through the panel speaker, Silas's code for a cleared entry from the north path. I knew it was Ethan before the door even opened. He was the only person besides Silas who had the sequence, and Silas didn't make house calls. The hydraulic door swung inward. Ethan ducked slightly, coming through. He'd always been tall, 6'2", since he was 17, and he'd never quite adjusted to low clearances. He was in a dark jacket, boots still damp from the path, a thermos in one hand. He stopped when he saw the monitors. All 24 feeds arranged across 3 screens. The living room where Conrad was watching television. The kitchen where the champagne bottles from last night were still on the counter. The master bedroom lights off. The guest suite, Bianca's room, where the lamp was still on. Ethan stood there for a long moment, taking it in. "You've been watching them this whole time," he said. "That's the idea." He set the thermos on the desk. "I brought coffee. Real coffee. The stuff in the emergency kit tastes like cardboard." "It does," I agreed. "Sit down, Ethan." He sat, poured 2 cups, handed me one without asking how I took it. He'd known since he was 12. We didn't say anything for a moment. On the monitor, Conrad changed channels. Bianca's light was still on in the guest suite. Ethan's eyes moved between the screens with the trained patience of someone who'd spent years doing surveillance work. "You said you had something to tell me," I said. He wrapped both hands around his cup. "I don't know how to start it." "Start wherever it's heaviest." He looked at the screens, then at me. "I introduced you to him, Conrad, 8 years ago at the Denver Architecture Gala. Do you remember?" "I remember. You were there for the Hendricks Foundation reception. I was there doing a background check on a contractor for a client. Conrad was working the room." He stopped. "He was good at it. I'll give him that. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most interesting person he'd talked to all evening. I thought..." He exhaled. "I thought he was talented. I thought you two might have things in common. I introduced you as a favor. 30 seconds. That's all it was." "Ethan, I need to finish." He said it quietly but firmly. "I introduced you, and 2 months later you told me you were seeing him, and something in my gut said it was wrong, and I didn't say anything. I told myself it was none of my business, that you were a grown woman who didn't need her son second-guessing her choices." He set the cup down. "I've been living with that for 8 years, Mom. Every year it got worse." I looked at my son's face. 32 years old, and in that moment he looked the way he had at 10 when he'd broken something valuable and couldn't figure out how to confess it. "I know," I said. He looked up. "You..." "I've known for 6 years." The room was very quiet. 6 years," he said. 2 years into the marriage. I found inconsistencies in the timeline of how Conrad and I were introduced. Small things, the guest list for the gala, a conversation I remembered slightly differently than Conrad described it, a name that appeared in both his background and yours from that period. I paused. I had Silas run a full trace. Conrad had been in contact with Bianca for at least 3 months before that evening. She was 18. She wasn't orchestrating anything elaborate, she was doing what she was coached to do. Point him toward the right room at the right time. Ethan was very still. She used me. She used the situation. You were a door she walked through. You didn't open it for her? You were just there. I should have seen it. You were 24 years old at a networking event. Conrad was 50 and had been running that particular play for years. There is no version of that night where you were supposed to catch it. It doesn't make it right, he said. No, I agreed. But it makes it human. I looked at him until he met my eyes. That's why we're here, Ethan. Not to punish ourselves for what we didn't see in time, to fix what we can still fix. He sat with that for a while. On monitor 7, the guest suite, Bianca had moved from the bed to the small desk by the window. She was typing on her laptop, but I could see from the angle that her right hand kept moving to her jacket pocket. The second phone. When did you find out about the other phone? I asked. Ethan's head came up. 3 weeks ago, Silas flagged it when he was running the pre-op security sweep. She's been carrying a second device for at least 11 months, registered under a name that doesn't match any ID on file. Who's she talking to? We don't know yet. Encrypted application. But the frequency of contact is high, multiple exchanges per day, including late at night. He paused. It's not Conrad she's messaging. His phone activity doesn't align with hers. I turned back to the monitor. Bianca closed the laptop, picked up the second phone, typed something short and fast. The kind of message you send when you've sent the same message many times before. Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the snow. She came here for a reason, I said. And it wasn't Conrad. That's what I think too. Then we need to know what the reason is before Friday. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes on the screen. There's something else. He pointed to the lower left corner of monitor 7, not Bianca at the window, but the hallway outside her door. Watch the timestamp on that feed, 11:42 last night. I pulled the archived footage this afternoon. I switched the view to the archived feed. At 11:42 p.m. the previous night, while Conrad was already asleep on the couch downstairs, the hallway camera showed a door opening. Not Bianca's door, Leo's door, and Bianca walking through it. I watched the footage. 12 seconds. The door closed. The hallway was empty again. How long was she in there? I asked. 41 minutes. I set my coffee down. Mom. Ethan's voice was careful. I don't think Bianca is here for Conrad. No, I said. I looked at the current feed, Bianca back at the window, phone in hand, the mountain dark behind her. I don't think she ever was. I reached over and squeezed my son's hand once. Just once. Then I turned back to the screens. There were 2 days left before Friday. 47 hours to understand exactly what Bianca Reyes was doing in this house, and who else beyond Conrad she was doing it for. I picked up my pen and opened a new page in the notebook. At the top, I wrote one word, Bianca, underlined it twice, and started from the beginning. The best liars aren't the ones you never suspect. They're the ones who make you feel like suspicion itself is the problem. Bianca Reyes wasn't that good. She was just operating in a room full of men who never looked carefully enough. Ethan stayed until nearly 2 in the morning. We didn't talk much after the Leo footage we watched. That's the thing about surveillance work, that most people don't understand the patience of it. You don't look for the big moments. You look for the small ones, the ones that don't fit. And then you wait for them to connect. At 12:47, Bianca's lamp was still on. She was at the desk again, second phone in hand, typing in short bursts, the rhythm of someone in an active back-and-forth conversation. Not composing, responding. How far back does the second phone activity go? I asked. Ethan had his laptop open beside me, running the carrier trace Silas had started 3 days ago. The number was activated 11 months ago. Prepaid SIM, registered to a Sarah Brennan at an address in Aurora that doesn't exist. He scrolled. But the purchase location was a convenience store 14 blocks from Conrad's Denver office. 14 blocks. Close enough that it wasn't random. Whoever set this up knew where Conrad worked. Or she bought it herself and chose the location deliberately. I watched Bianca set the phone face down on the desk. What application is she using? Signal, end-to-end encrypted. Messages auto-delete after 24 hours. We can't read the content. He paused. But we can track the frequency. She's been averaging 11 to 14 exchanges per day for the past 3 weeks. Whoever she's talking to, it's constant. It's not Conrad. Conrad's phone activity peaks in the morning and around 6 p.m. Hers spikes at midnight and again around 5 a.m. They're on completely different schedules. I considered that. On the monitor, Bianca stood up. She was dressed not in sleepwear but in clothes, which meant she hadn't been planning to sleep. She moved to the door of the guest suite, opened it slowly, and checked the hallway in both directions the way someone checks a road before crossing. The hallway was empty. She went left, toward Leo's room. "Here we go," Ethan said quietly. She knocked twice. Soft, the kind of knock that expects an answer because it's been expected. The door opened within 4 seconds. Leo didn't lean out to check who it was. He already knew. I watched him step back to let her in. "He's not surprised," I said. He was never going to be surprised. Ethan's jaw was set in the particular way it gets when he's angry and managing it. "Mom, I've been looking at Leo's financial records for the past week. His personal account has received 3 transfers in the last 8 months, 20,000, 35,000, and 50,000, all from an LLC registered in Nevada." "What LLC? That's the thing. The LLC name is Coastal Design Partners. It has no website, no listed address, no employees on record. It was incorporated 7 months ago." He turned the laptop toward me. The registered agent is a law firm in Las Vegas that specializes in shell company formation. I looked at the numbers, then at the screen where Leo had just closed his door behind Bianca. "Someone's been paying Leo," I said. "For 8 months. Before the divorce papers were even drafted. And the source connects to a shell company with no public footprint." I sat back. "She didn't come here for Conrad." "No," Ethan said. "I don't think she did. She came here to get something. And she brought Leo in because Leo knew the inside of this house, the firm, the finances." I thought about the way Leo had looked at Conrad over dinner in Task 1, the calculation behind the boredom, the way he'd asked about his share of the firm not out of sentiment, but out of inventory. Leo thinks he's using her. She's using him. And Conrad thinks he's using both of them. 3 people in a room, I said, each one certain they're the smartest. Ethan looked at me. "Are you going to tell me what you think she's actually after?" "Not yet. I have a theory. I need 1 more day to confirm it." I turned back to the monitor. "What I know right now is that whatever Bianca is doing, Leo is compromised. He's been taking payments. That makes him a witness and a liability to her, to Conrad, and to himself. And to us, it makes him useful." I picked up the pen. "A man who's been bought once is easier to flip than a man who thinks he has nothing to lose." Ethan nodded slowly. The anger was still there. I could see it in his posture, the tension across his shoulders. He was holding it the way you hold something hot, carefully waiting for the right moment to put it down. "She walked into Leo's room like she owned it," he said. Not loudly, just stating it. "She walks into every room like that. It doesn't bother you." I looked at the hallway feed, empty now, Leo's door closed, everything still. What bothers me is not understanding the full picture before Friday. That's the only thing I don't have time for. I made a note on the pad. "Get me everything you can on Coastal Design Partners by tomorrow night. Registered agent incorporation date. Any linked entities. Already running it. And Ethan." I waited until he looked up. "The payments to Leo, don't flag them to Miller yet. Not until we know what they connect to." "Understood." He stayed another 20 minutes, then left the way he came. 3 beeps. The hydraulic door, the quiet of the north path, swallowing him back into the dark. I turned off the lights and worked by the glow of the monitors. At 4:15, Leo's door opened again. Bianca walked out unhurried, tucking the second phone into her pocket. She went back to the guest suite, closed her door. I noted the time, added it to the log. Then I thought about Martha. Martha Rivera had been in this house for 12 years. She knew where every cleaning supply was kept, which burner ran hot, which guest preferred their coffee black. She also knew, because she was the kind of woman who paid attention, that Conrad had never once asked her last name. Tomorrow morning at 8, she would carry his coffee upstairs on a silver tray, the way she always did. She would set it on the nightstand, ask if he needed anything else, and leave the room. And in the front pocket of her apron would be a recording device, no larger than a shirt button, one Silas had sourced from a federal law enforcement supplier and calibrated to pick up conversation. At a range of 20 feet, with a battery life of 14 hours. Colorado was a one-party consent state. Martha was a party to every conversation she participated in. Everything Conrad said in that house tomorrow was already evidence. He just didn't know it yet. Martha Rivera had worked in this house for 12 years. She knew which burner on the Viking Range ran 3 degrees hot. She knew Conrad took his coffee with 2 sugars in winter and 1 in summer, a preference he'd never told her, she'd simply noticed. She knew which floorboard in the upstairs hallway creaked and had learned without being asked to step over it when she came to collect the laundry. Conrad Thorne had never learned her last name. I watched her on the monitor at 8:03 in the morning, moving through my kitchen with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times. Tray cups, French press. The small pitcher of cream she kept in the back of the refrigerator because Conrad's girlfriend, whichever one it happened to be, always asked for it. The apron was the white one. The one with the deep front pocket. I had confirmed with Silas the night before the device was active, the battery was full, and the range was sufficient to capture conversation across the entire open-plan kitchen and dining area. Martha didn't need to stand next to anyone. She just needed to be in the room. She was always in the room. Conrad came down at 8:15. Leo followed 10 minutes later, looking like a man who had slept poorly and resented it. Bianca was last composed, unhurried, the second phone already in her jacket pocket. She sat at the far end of the breakfast table and accepted her coffee without looking at Martha. None of them looked at Martha. That was the thing about people like Conrad. They moved through spaces maintained by other people and never once considered that those people were paying attention. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was a more fundamental failure of imagination, the inability to conceive that someone quiet and useful might also be someone watching. Conrad settled into the chair at the head of the table. My table. He reached for the newspaper, an actual print copy, a habit he'd maintained since his 50s because he said it helped him think, and opened it to the business section. The transfer cleared this morning, he said, to the table rather than to anyone specific. All of it, clean. Leo poured cream into his coffee. Both transfers. Both. By the time Alara's lawyers pull the account records, the money will have moved through 3 separate entities. Nothing traceable back to me directly. I wrote that down verbatim, time-stamped it. Bianca looked up from her phone. And the firm account? Separate structure. The trust funds go in as a capital contribution from a holding company. On paper, it looks like outside investment. He turned a page of the newspaper. I had the accountant set it up 8 months ago. 8 months. So he'd been planning this for 8 months. Not an impulsive decision, a structured one. That mattered for the federal case. Premeditation changes the sentencing calculus considerably. Martha appeared at Conrad's elbow with the French press. More coffee, Mr. Thorne. Sure, Martha. He didn't look up from the paper. She poured. Slow, steady, the way she always did, standing close enough that the device in her apron pocket was well within range of every word being spoken. Leo leaned forward. What about the house? She left. It's mine now. Conrad flipped another page. Simple as that. The deed is still in her name, Leo said. Not for long. Conrad set the paper down and picked up his coffee. I have an appointment with a title company on the 23rd. Once the deed transfer is filed, the property is legally restructured under the firm's holding entity. Ilara can't contest it if she's not here to file an objection in time. Bianca tilted her head. Patricia Wren can file on her behalf. Patricia Wren needs a client who's present and accessible to authorize emergency motions. Ilara walked out. She hasn't contacted anyone. He smiled. Silence is abandonment, legally speaking. My attorney confirmed it. I almost laughed. Silence is abandonment. His attorney had told him that. I made a note to have Patricia pull the name of that attorney, because whoever had given Conrad that advice had either never read Colorado property law or had been told a very incomplete version of the facts. In Colorado, voluntary departure from a marital home does not constitute legal abandonment of property rights. Ownership is established by the deed, not by physical presence. A spouse or ex-spouse retains full legal standing to contest any title transfer regardless of their current address. Conrad's attorney, whoever they were, had given him a dangerously wrong piece of information. He had built his entire plan on it. Leo poured a second cup. And when does the divorce finalize? 90 days from filing. Standard Colorado timeline. By March, everything is restructured and there's nothing left to dispute. He picked up the newspaper again. She'll get a settlement offer. Something reasonable. She'll take it because she won't have the leverage to fight for more. What if she contests? She can contest from wherever she went. Conrad shrugged. Without access to the house, without the trust funds, without a legal team that can move fast enough, she's negotiating from a position of nothing. People in that position take what they're offered. Martha moved to Leo's side of the table, refilled his cup without being asked. Leo didn't acknowledge her. What about the watch? Bianca said. A short silence. What about it? Conrad said. Leo threw it into the snow. That was her late husband's property. Sentimental value aside, there could be a personal property claim. Conrad looked at his son. Leo looked at the table. It was an accident, Leo said. It was exactly what it was, Conrad replied and moved on. Martha collected the empty cream pitcher and walked back to the kitchen. She refilled it at the counter, her back to the table, her movements unhurried. Her expression, as best I could, read it on the camera, perfectly neutral. I had known Martha for 12 years. I had seen her navigate difficult guests, unreasonable demands, and at least 2 occasions when Conrad had spoken to her in a tone that would have made a lesser person walk out the door. She had never once lost her composure. She was not losing it now. At 9:47, Conrad left for his home office on the 2nd floor. Leo went to the gym. Bianca returned to the guest suite. Martha finished the breakfast service, loaded the dishwasher, and wiped down the counters. Then she walked to the utility room where the camera didn't reach and sent me a single text message. 23 minutes. Clear audio throughout. Sending now. The file arrived 4 minutes later. I listened to it once, beginning to end. Conrad's voice relaxed and unguarded, laying out the entire structure, the transfers, the shell companies, the title plan, the settlement strategy. 23 minutes of a man explaining in his own words and of his own free will exactly what he had done and what he intended to do next. I forwarded it to Miller with a one-line message. Is this enough? His reply came in 3 minutes. More than enough. See you Friday morning. I set the phone down. 2 days. Ryan Holt had been waiting 3 years for this story. Marcus Webb had been waiting for it his entire career. I was just the person who decided when they got to tell it. Ethan called on the afternoon of the 15th, 2 days before Friday. Not with an update, I had enough updates. He called because he'd been in Denver that morning and had sat across from both of them in person, and there were things he said he needed to relay directly rather than through text. I listened from the panic room with my notebook open and the monitor feeds running quietly in the background. Start with Marcus, I said. Ethan exhaled. He's younger than I expected. 28. But he carries himself like someone who's been tired for a long time. A pause. He brought a portfolio case, the physical kind, the big flat ones architects use. He set it on the conference table and opened it, and Ryan just went quiet. What was in it? Original blueprints, hand annotated. Every revision note in Marcus's handwriting dated and initialed. 3 complete project files, the Ridgeline Tower in Boulder, the Harlow Estate in Vale, and the Meridian Complex in Aspen. Ethan's voice was level, but careful. Those are Conrad's 3 flagship projects, the ones that built his reputation, the ones he's been dining out on for 4 years. I already knew this. I had known for 18 months. Which was why Marcus Webb's name was on the list Silas had started compiling the day I decided Conrad's exit needed to be permanent rather than merely painful. But hearing Ethan describe it, the portfolio case, the dated annotations, the silence that fell over Ryan Holt, made it specific in a way that files on a screen never quite did. What did Marcus say? I asked. Ethan shifted. I could hear him recalling it precisely. He had his father's memory for conversation, which was one of the things I'd always been grateful for. Ryan asked him directly, "Why did you sign the NDA?" And Marcus said. Ethan paused. He made me sign an agreement that stripped me of any right to claim creative credit. I was 24. I needed the money. I had student loans and a studio apartment, and Conrad Thorne was offering me more than I'd ever been paid for anything. So I signed. And the originals, Ryan asked him the same thing, whether he'd kept copies. Marcus said. Another pause. I kept everything. Every sketch, every revision note, every email thread where he told me what to change, and I changed it, and it became what you see in those buildings. His handwriting is nowhere in those files. Not a single mark. I wrote that down. Under copyright law in the United States, the creator of an original work holds the copyright from the moment of creation unless the work was produced under a formal work-for-hire agreement. Conrad's NDA had prohibited Marcus from publicly claiming credit, but it had not contained a work-for-hire clause, which meant that for 4 years, Conrad had been presenting Marcus's copyrighted work as his own to clients to award committees to the investors who would be sitting in my living room on Friday morning. That wasn't just professional misconduct. It was copyright infringement on a commercial scale. How did Ryan react? I asked. He didn't say anything for about 30 seconds. Then he looked at Marcus and said, "Do you understand what this does to his firm?" What did Marcus say? Ethan's voice was quiet. I've understood that for 4 years. I just didn't have anyone who could help me do something about it. I sat with that for a moment. 24 years old, offered more money than he'd ever seen presented with a document he probably didn't have a lawyer review, signing away visibility on work that would go on to define another man's entire career. There was nothing naive about it. There was just the particular desperation of someone young and talented in an industry that runs on reputation, being handed a lifeline with a price tag he couldn't fully read at the time. Tell me about Ryan, I said. He's been building this for 3 years on partial records and instinct. He knew something was off about the timeline of Conrad's rise. The projects were too refined for someone with Conrad's prior portfolio. The design language shifted too dramatically between his early work and the 3 flagship projects. Ethan paused. He just couldn't prove it until Marcus. The article is ready. Written, edited, fact-checked, and sitting in a queue at the Denver Post. Ryan's been holding it under a source verification hold standard protocol when the subject is likely to pursue legal action. The moment it publishes, it's fully documented. He understands the timing. He does. I told him Friday morning, and he said, Ethan almost smiled. I could hear it. Tell your mother I've waited 3 years. I can wait until Friday. Good. I turned to a fresh page in the notebook. How did you know about the investor meeting? Martha heard Conrad confirm it on a call Wednesday morning. 12 people, 8 investors, 2 partners from the firm Conrad's accountant and a project manager for the Denver Tower. A pause. He's planning to use the meeting to announce the new capital structure. The trust funds reframed as outside investment. Of course he was. Tell Ryan Friday morning, not 1 minute before the investors arrive. Why wait for them to be in the room? I looked at the monitor. Conrad was in the home office upstairs, reviewing something on his laptop with the satisfaction of a man who believed he was already winning. Because a man losing his reputation in private can always rebuild the narrative, I said. A man losing it in front of the people who are about to give him money cannot. Ethan went quiet for a moment. Then, understood. I'll relay it. We talked through a few remaining logistics, the exact sequence for Friday, the order in which Miller and Patricia would enter, the positioning that would ensure Conrad had no clear exit route before everything was on the table. Then Ethan said goodnight, and I turned back to the monitors. Thursday passed the way. The days before a carefully planned thing always pass slowly, and then, all at once. At 9:47 Thursday evening, my phone lit up with an incoming call. Conrad Thorne. I watched the screen for 4 full rings. His name illuminated patient. He'd never called me once in the 4 days since he'd pushed me out the door into a blizzard. The fact that he was calling now meant something had shifted, some small uncertainty had crept into the certainty he'd been wearing all week. I let it ring out. Then I typed one line and sent it. I'll see you Friday. He didn't reply. I set the phone face down and thought about what it meant that he'd called at all, what small crack had appeared in the confidence, what detail hadn't landed the way he'd planned. I didn't know, and it didn't matter. Whatever he was uncertain about Friday would answer it for him. All of it. Conrad Thorne had spent his entire life building the illusion that he was the most talented man in the room. On Friday morning, he invited 8 investors to witness it. He didn't know they would witness something else entirely. I watched him from camera 7. He stood at the head of the room like a man who had already won. The projector threw blue light across his face. His suit was pressed. His posture was rehearsed. Behind him, a rendering of a glass tower filled the screen, sleek, modern, expensive. The kind of building that makes men believe in other men. I checked the clock. 7:14 a.m., 46 minutes. Gentlemen, Conrad said, voice filling every corner of the room. What you're looking at is the most ambitious mixed-use commercial and residential development in Colorado history. My firm holds the exclusive design contract. No competing bids, no shared credit. Investor Richard Caldwell, silver hair navy blazer, a man who had written checks for Conrad 3 times before, leaned forward. Impressive, Conrad. Your track record speaks for itself. Conrad smiled. It always does. The Ridgeline Tower alone put your firm on the national map, said investor Thomas Hargrove, mid-40s, quiet, the most precise mind in the room. This Denver project, what's the structural timeline? Permits filed and approved. Leo answered before Conrad could. Jefferson County signed off November 3rd. We break ground March 15th. Conrad gave Leo a brief nod. My son has been integral to pre-development. This is a legacy project, gentlemen, built by one firm, one family. Family legacy. I wrote that down in the margin of my legal pad. I switched to camera 3. Bianca sat 3 chairs back, slightly apart from the investor row, not quite at the table, not quite removed. Her posture was relaxed, her smile was practiced. Her right hand rested in her lap. The second phone was in her jacket pocket. I could see the faint pressure of it against the fabric, a vibration once, twice, then still. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. Phase 1 projected return 42% over 18 months. Conrad continued, clicking to the next slide. Phase 2 brings the total valuation to $200 million. Full capitalization closes today, assuming everyone in this room commits. Investor Paul Whitfield, youngest of the 8, early 30s, glanced sideways. Who's the principal designer on record, in-house or contracted? Conrad paused. Half a second. In-house. Our lead designer has been with the firm since its founding. Name, Whitfield pressed. That information is proprietary during the active contract phase, Leo said smoothly. We can provide full disclosure post-signing under NDA. Whitfield nodded slowly. He wasn't satisfied. He wrote something in the margin of his own packet. I noted that too. Leo leaned slightly toward Bianca's voice low enough that only camera 4's audio could catch it. How much longer? Bianca didn't turn her head. Not long. He still hasn't mentioned the restructuring clause. He won't, Bianca said. He doesn't know it exists. And when it comes out, stay calm, she said. Don't move until I give you the signal. Leo sat back. He picked up his pen. He wrote nothing. Conrad clicked to the asset overview slide. A list of collateral holdings appeared on the screen properties account's equity stakes. At the top of the list in clean, bold type, 14 Ridgeline Summit Drive, Aspen, Colorado. Estimated value $14.2 million. This property, Hargrove said. Eyes on the slide, the mansion it's listed as primary collateral. It is, Conrad said. Fully owned, no outstanding liens, no encumbrances. In whose name is the deed held? Conrad didn't pause. Mine. I almost smiled. He said it the way a man says something he has rehearsed until it no longer sounds like a lie. He said it like a fact, like a certainty, like something that had always been true and always would be. Solid foundation, said investor James Brecker, silver pen rotating between his fingers. Everything we build starts with a solid foundation, Conrad agreed. Bianca's phone buzzed again. This time she shifted slightly, crossed her legs, pressed her hand flat against her thigh. The motion was small. It would mean nothing to anyone who wasn't watching for it. I had been watching for 2 years. I switched back to camera 7. Conrad was at full momentum now, hands moving, voice rising. The practiced cadence of a man who had given this pitch 100 times and believed every word of it more with each repetition. The Denver skyline will look different in 5 years, he said. And the men in this room will have made that happen. Caldwell straightened. I've seen the preliminary renders. They're exceptional. Because the design is exceptional, Conrad said. Every line, every structural choice. This is what 20 years of work looks like, gentlemen. I checked the clock. 7:41 a.m., 12 minutes. Investor Martin Elroy, heavyset, late 50s, a man who spoke rarely but moved large amounts of money when he did set his packet down flat on the table. Conrad, I want to revisit the ownership structure. Specifically, your marital status affects any of these asset-backed guarantees. The room shifted slightly. Subtle. The way rooms shift when someone asks the question everyone else was avoiding. Ilara and I are separating, Conrad said. The assets are being restructured under my sole ownership. There's no overlap, no competing claims. Separation agreement signed? Elroy asked. In process, Conrad said. Legal is handling it. No issue on the property title? None, Conrad said. Everything is clean. Elroy looked at Hargrove. Something passed between them, the kind of hesitation that happens when a number sounds correct, but something underneath it doesn't. Brecker tapped his pen twice against the table. And Mrs. Vance, is she aware of today's meeting? Conrad smiled. She's no longer involved in business decisions. I wrote one word on my legal pad, yet. I checked the clock. 7:48 a.m., 5 minutes. Conrad clicked to the final slide. The full project timeline, the full valuation. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. The numbers were clean. The design was stolen. The collateral wasn't his. The name on the deed belonged to me. He stood up there like he owned the world. And I watched the clock. 7:53 a.m. I switched to camera 1, the front gate. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the top of the driveway. The engine cut. The door opened. Inspector Daniel Miller stepped out. He adjusted his jacket. He looked at the front door the way a man looks at something he has been patient about for a long time. Behind him, 2 uniformed officers. I set my legal pad down. I stood up. I stretched my back. 4 days of silence, 4 days of watching, 4 days of waiting, and I felt every one of them leave my spine. And for the first time since Friday night, I walked out of the panic room. Before I reveal what happened when that door opened, comment "open" if you think Alara walks back in. Comment "no" if you think she's already lost everything. Because in 60 seconds, every single person in that room is about to find out they were wrong about which woman they were dealing with. Note, this story contains fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Names and settings are coincidental, but what it reveals isn't. I hadn't looked in a mirror in 4 days. When I stepped through the dark corridor and caught my reflection in the window pane at the end of the hall, I almost didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. Then I did. She was the woman I had been before I wasted 8 years trusting Conrad Thorne. I straightened my jacket. I took one breath. Then I walked forward. The corridor from the panic room fed into the back of the main hall, a passage Conrad had never noticed, because Conrad had never looked at the bones of this house. He looked at surfaces. He always had. I heard his voice before I reached the doorway. And that brings us to the final capitalization structure, which I believe represents the cleanest opportunity any of you have seen in. I stepped into the room. The silence came from the left side first. Investor Paul Whitfield saw me before Conrad did. His head turned. Then Hargrove's, then Caldwell's. One by one. 8 men stopped looking at the projector screen and looked at me instead. Conrad was mid-sentence when he felt it, that particular quality of silence that means the room has shifted without your permission. He turned. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he is certain cannot be there. "What? How did you—" He stopped. The words didn't finish themselves. I walked toward the center of the room, unhurried. I had been waiting 4 days for this 30 seconds. I was not going to rush it. Before Conrad could recover, the front door opened. Inspector Daniel Miller walked in first. He didn't knock a second time. He stepped into the room with the particular calm of a man who has done this before and knows exactly how it ends. 2 uniformed officers followed, one to each side. Miller scanned the room once. His eyes settled on Conrad. "Mr. Thorne." His voice was level. "I'm Inspector Daniel Miller, Aspen Police Department. I need you to step away from the presentation." Conrad turned fully. The color hadn't left his face yet. That would come later. Right now, he was still running on the momentum of a man who believed he controlled the room. "This is my home." "Shh," Conrad said. "This is a private business meeting. You don't have authority to—" "Sir." One word. Miller didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Conrad stopped. The side door opened. Dr. Patricia Wren entered, carrying a leather portfolio that I knew contained 63 pages of documentation, 3 sworn affidavits, 2 certified court orders, and 1 marriage contract that Conrad had signed 8 years ago without reading past the second page. She walked to the center of the room and stood beside me. She didn't look at Conrad. She set the portfolio on the conference table precisely, deliberately, and then she looked at him. "Mr. Thorne," Patricia said. "I'm Dr. Patricia Wren, legal counsel for Mrs. Alara Vance. We have several matters to discuss." Conrad's eyes moved between Patricia and me. The calculation was visible. I had watched this man think for 8 years, and I knew what his face looked like when he was running numbers. He turned back to me. "You left," he said. "I watched you leave. I saw you walk out with your suitcase." I took one more step forward. "You saw what I wanted you to see." The room absorbed that. 8 investors, 2 officers, 1 inspector. No one spoke. No one moved. Conrad stood at the head of a table that hadn't been his for 4 days, and was only now beginning to understand it. Caldwell cleared his throat. "Conrad, what exactly is happening here?" Conrad didn't answer him. He was still looking at me. Hargrove leaned back in his chair slowly. "I think we should pause the meeting." "I agree," said Whitfield. He closed his packet. Investor Martin Elroy, who had said very little all morning, set both hands flat on the table and watched Conrad with the expression of a man revising a decision he had almost made. Miller stepped forward. Mr. Thorne, I have a certified court order confirming that the property at 14 Ridgeline Summit Drive is held solely in the name of Elara Vance. You are in violation of a lawful lockout order. I need you to step outside. This is not. Conrad's voice cracked on the second word. He steadied it. This is not how property law works. I filed for divorce. The assets are documented in the court order, Miller said. I'd encourage you not to argue property law with me at this moment, Mr. Thorne. Brecker stood up quietly and moved his chair back from the table. Conrad turned to Leo. Call our attorney. Right now. Leo didn't move immediately. Something flickered across his face, a calculation of his own brief and cold, and then he reached for his phone. Bianca sat perfectly still in her chair. She said nothing. She looked at the portfolio on the table the way someone looks at a thing they have been expecting. Patricia opened the portfolio. She didn't hand Conrad anything yet. She simply turned to the first tabbed section and let him see the header of the top document. Superior Court of Colorado, Pitkin County, Property Order Number 2, 024-CR-0891. Sole owner, Elara Vance. That order was certified at 6:45 this morning, Patricia said, which means everything presented in this room as collateral in Mr. Thorne's name was presented incorrectly. Hargrove looked at Elroy. Neither of them spoke. Caldwell turned to Conrad. Conrad, is the deed in your name or not? Conrad said nothing. Conrad. Still nothing. Miller nodded to the two officers. They moved to either side of Conrad, not grabbing, not aggressive, simply present. The way the law becomes physical without becoming violent. Mr. Thorne, I'm going to ask you one more time to step outside voluntarily. Conrad looked at me. He looked at Miller. He looked at Patricia. Then he reached into his document case. He pulled out a bound contract, cream-colored paper, gold-embossed header, 8 years of dust on its memory. I signed this 8 years ago, he said, and his voice found its confidence again, the way a drowning man finds something to grab. I have rights to an equitable division of marital assets. Whatever she's filed, whatever that order says, I am entitled to half. He set it on the table. He looked at the investors, then at Miller, then at me. He thought he still had a card to play. Patricia looked at the contract. Then she smiled, the first time since she had walked through that door. There is one thing I learned in 30 years of finance. The best contract is the one the other party signs with confidence without reading carefully. Conrad had been confident. Conrad had always been confident. That was the point. He set the contract on the table like a winning hand. Cream paper, gold header, 8 years old. He smoothed the top page with his palm, the gesture of a man who believed the document was his salvation. This contract, Conrad said, voice recovered, clearly states an equal division of marital assets. 50-50. Page 12, Section 4. My attorney drafted it. Your client signed it. He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at the contract. She didn't touch it yet. You're referring to page 12, she said. But you've never read page 19. Have you, Mr. Thorne? Conrad frowned. There is no page 19. There is now. She reached into the portfolio. What she removed was small. Matte black casing. A single bulb at one end. The kind of tool that looks like nothing until it does everything. Conrad stared at it. What is that? A UV lamp? Oh, Patricia said. Standard document verification equipment. You're not touching my contract with it's Mrs. Vance's contract, Patricia said. She signed it too. She clicked the lamp on. A pale violet light filled the space between her hand and the table. She held it 6 inches above the final pages of the contract, unhurried, precise. The way she did everything. The room leaned forward, and the words appeared. Not printed, not typed, written in a hand that had spent decades making sure every letter meant exactly what it said. Pale violet against cream paper. A full paragraph. Unmistakable. Conrad went still. Caldwell stood up from his chair without realizing he had done it. Hargrove said nothing. He just looked. Whitfield leaned across the table. Is that are those additional clauses? They are, Patricia said. She didn't look up. She was already reading. She read it aloud. Measured. Every word given its full weight. In the event of documented marital infidelity or unilateral termination of the marriage within the first 10 years, the filing party shall forfeit all claims to shared marital assets and shall owe the non-filing party $8 million in liquidated damages payable within 90 days of the filing date. She stopped. The room was completely silent. Then she added, witnessed, notarized, and time-stamped September 14th, 2016, the same date as the primary contract. Conrad's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then, that's not? I never agreed to. You signed it, Alara said. I signed the standard. Page 19, Alara said. Your signature. Your initials in the margin. The notary's seal is on the same page. Conrad grabbed the contract. He flipped to the back. His hands were not steady. He found the page. He found his signature. The initials in the margin CT in his own hand, the same ink he used on every document he had ever signed without reading. He set it down. He didn't speak. Elroy picked up his portfolio from the table. He did it quietly. He didn't make a production of it. He simply picked it up, straightened his jacket, and looked at Conrad with the expression of a man who has just revised a very large decision. I think we're done here, Elroy said. Caldwell looked at Hargrove. Hargrove was already standing. Conrad Caldwell said, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there an hour ago, something that sounded like the end of a long patience. I've known you 15 years. You should have told us. Conrad didn't answer him. Brecker closed his notepad. He tucked his pen into his breast pocket. He looked at me briefly, not with hostility, not with sympathy, with the particular neutrality of a man who is going to be very careful about what he says to anyone for the next several weeks. Whitfield was already moving toward the door. Leo hadn't moved. He sat at the far end of the table with the folder still open in front of him. His pen was on the table. His eyes were on his father. Dad, he said. One word. Flat. Conrad looked at him. Leo didn't say anything else. He just looked back, and in that look was something I had seen building for 3 days on 24 cameras. The calculation of a young man deciding which way to fall when the structure collapses. Bianca sat 2 chairs away from Leo. Her second phone was in her lap. Her thumb moved once across the screen, a single message sent, before anyone in the room could process what was happening. I saw it. I noted it. I said nothing. Mr. Thorne. Patricia closed the portfolio. The liquidated damages clause becomes enforceable the moment divorce proceedings are formalized. Given that you filed papers 6 days ago, the 90-day clock began on December 14th. That gives you until March 14th. Conrad looked at her. I'll contest it. You're welcome to, Patricia said. The notarization is valid under Colorado contract law. The clause was disclosed at signing. The UV ink was a security measure, not a concealment. 3 courts have upheld identical clauses in the last 7 years. I drafted 2 of those cases personally. Conrad turned to Miller. This is a civil matter. You have no jurisdiction here. The property order is not a civil matter, Miller said, and neither is what I'm about to tell you. He looked at his phone. He had felt it vibrate 2 minutes ago. He had waited for the right moment. He looked up at Conrad. Mr. Thorne, the IRS has formally opened a federal investigation into the transfer of $4,200,000 from the Vance Thorne Family Trust. Transaction dated December 13th, 2024, effective as of this morning. Conrad looked at me. For the first time in 8 years, in perhaps his entire life, I saw it. Not anger, not contempt. Not the practiced confidence of a man who believed rooms belonged to him. Fear, real fear, the kind that doesn't perform. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then I looked away. I had work to do. Ryan Holt published at 8:15. I knew the exact moment because 3 investors' phones went off at the same time. Not 1, not 2. 3 simultaneously, the particular sound of an industry alert hitting multiple screens at once. The kind of alert that financial people set for names they need to monitor. The kind they don't ignore. The room had already been quiet. That kind of quiet got quieter. Hargrove looked at his phone first. His face didn't change. Hargrove's face never changed, but his thumb stopped moving and he read the same paragraph twice. I watched him do it. Then Caldwell, then Whitfield. Caldwell looked up. Conrad, what is this? He turned his phone around. The headline was clean. No sensationalism. Ryan didn't need it. The facts were enough. Thorn Architecture Group 3. Flagship projects built on stolen designs. Exclusive architect Marcus Webb speaks. Conrad looked at the screen. Something moved across his face. Not fear this time, not the look from 2 minutes ago. Something older. The look of a man who has been running from a particular morning for years and has just realized it arrived. That's a lie, he said. That's fabricated. That reporter has been trying to. She, Marcus Webb. Elroy read from his own phone voice flat. Young Architect of the Year, 3 years ago, Denver Design Awards. He set the phone face down on the table. I was at that ceremony, Conrad. Conrad said nothing. I shook his hand. Elroy said, You were there too. You gave a speech about mentorship. Brecker stood up. He did it without ceremony, simply rose from the chair, buttoned his jacket, and picked up his portfolio in one motion. Conrad, he said, I've been in this industry 26 years. I've seen men survive IRS investigations. I've seen men survive divorce proceedings. He paused. I have never seen a man survive a stolen design story with source documentation and original blueprints. The blueprints are annotated in his hand, Brecker said. Dated. The article has photographs. Conrad turned to Hargrove. Thomas, you know me. Hargrove looked at him for a long moment. I thought I did. He picked up his coat. Whitfield was already reading the full article. He scrolled once, twice, stopped on something. It says here, Webb retained copyright because there was no work-for-hire clause in his agreement. The NDA expired September this year. He looked up. Conrad, did you know the NDA expired? That agreement was yes or no, Whitfield said. Conrad didn't answer. Whitfield set his phone in his breast pocket. I think we're done here. Gentlemen? Conrad stepped forward. His voice had the shape of authority but not the substance anymore. This is a coordinated attack. My wife, my estranged wife, has been building this for Shaw. Conrad. Caldwell cut him off. Not loudly. The way you stop someone when you've already made your decision and you don't want to hear anything that complicates your exit. We'll work through our attorneys. He didn't look back. Elroy followed, then Brecker, then Whitfield. One by one, not rushing, not dramatic, not angry. Just gone. The cold efficiency of men who had almost written very large checks and were profoundly grateful they had not. Hargrove was last. He stopped at the edge of the room and looked back once. For what it's worth, he said to no one in particular, the designs were exceptional, they always were. Then he left. The room held Conrad, me, Patricia, Miller, Leo, and Bianca. And the silence that follows when 8 people decide simultaneously that they have better places to be. Conrad stood at the head of the empty table. The projector was still running. The rendering of the Denver Tower still glowed on the screen behind him, $200 million of glass and steel built on 3 projects he hadn't designed presented in a house he didn't own. To investors who were now in their cars. He turned to me. "You did this," he said. "Marcus Webb did this," I said. "I just made sure the timing was right." "You called him? You gave him the documents?" "He had his own documents, Conrad. He kept copies of everything. For 4 years. In a fireproof case in his Denver apartment." I let that settle. He was waiting for his NDA to expire. All I did was make sure Ryan Holt was ready when it did. Conrad looked at Patricia. "I'll sue the Denver Post. I'll sue Webb. You're welcome to," Patricia said. "You'll be doing it while simultaneously defending a federal tax investigation, a property order violation, and a liquidated damages claim of $8 million. She closed her portfolio. "I'd suggest prioritizing." Miller had been quiet for 4 minutes. That was the longest I had seen him stay quiet. He was a man who spoke when there was something to say and waited when there wasn't. Now he spoke. "Mr. Thorne, I need you to come with me." Conrad turned. "Am I being arrested?" "Not at this moment," Miller said. "But I have questions that need to be answered at the station. And I'd prefer you come voluntarily." "And if I don't?" Miller looked at him steadily. "Then I stop preferring." Conrad looked at his document case. He looked at the contract still open on the table. He looked at the projector screen. He reached for his phone. "I need to call my attorney." "You can do that on the way," Miller said. Bianca hadn't spoken in 11 minutes. She sat in the same chair, second phone now visible in her hand, watching the room with the particular stillness of someone who has already made their calculations and is simply waiting for the right moment to act on them. Leo stood at the doorway. He had been there since the investors started leaving. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't tried to help his father, not once, not with a word, not with a look. He just stood there and watched the room empty and watched his father's career and freedom and reputation collapse in the space of 40 minutes on a Friday morning. I caught his eye from across the room. He held my gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked away. Then he opened his mouth. Leo Thorne was the only 19-year-old I had ever met who could look a person directly in the eye and lie without blinking. He learned that from his father, but he was smarter than his father in one regard: he knew when to stop. He moved before anyone expected him to, not toward his father, not toward the door. He walked directly to Miller, cutting across the empty room with the unhurried precision of someone who had already decided, who had in fact decided some time ago, and was only now executing. "Inspector Miller," he said, "I need 5 minutes. Privately." Miller looked at him. Leo was 19. He was standing in the wreckage of his father's career with the posture of a man who had somewhere better to be. "Leo?" Conrad's voice came from behind him, sharp, a warning, the tone of a man who still believed the word father carried authority. "Don't." Leo didn't turn around. "Leo, look at me." Leo looked at Miller. 5 minutes. Miller studied him for 2 seconds. Then he nodded toward the side office, a small room off the main hall glass door, enough privacy for a conversation that would later appear in a federal file. Conrad took 2 steps forward. "Whatever you're about to do—" "I'm protecting myself," Leo said, still not turning. "You taught me that." "I'm your father." Leo turned then, just once, to look at Conrad directly before he walked away. His face was the same face he had worn all morning, neutral, composed, the expression of someone who has separated emotion from decision and sees no reason to reconnect them. He said nothing. He walked into the office. Miller followed. The glass door clicked shut. I stood near the window. Patricia was behind me, portfolio closed, watching the office door. Conrad stood at the head of the empty table, still for the first time all morning, without anything to present or argue or perform. He looked at the closed door. He looked at the projector screen still running, the Denver Tower still glowing behind him like an accusation. He turned to me. You turn my son against me, he said. Leo makes his own decisions, I said. He always has. You just never noticed because they were the same as yours. Conrad looked at Patricia. Patricia said nothing. She had nothing left to add that the documents hadn't already said. He looked back at the door. Inside the office, I couldn't hear the words. But I didn't need to. I had known this moment was coming since Ethan told me about the 3 payments, $20,000, $35,000, $50,000 deposited into Leo's account from a Nevada shell company over 8 months. Leo hadn't been recruited by Bianca. He had been positioning himself. He'd been building his own exit strategy since summer, and when the morning came, he didn't hesitate. 12 minutes. That was how long it took. Miller opened the door and stepped out. He looked at me once, a single nod, brief and professional. The nod of a man who has just received more than he expected. Leo came out behind him. He walked to the far side of the room and stood near the window. He didn't look at his father. Conrad looked at his son, Leo. His voice had changed. The authority was gone. What was left underneath was something rawer, not anger, not yet. Something that hadn't had time to become anything specific. What did you just do? I gave a statement, Leo said. You. Conrad stopped, recalibrated. About what? The offshore accounts, the 3 shell companies, the actual numbers behind the Denver project. Leo looked at the floor for a moment, not from shame, I thought, but from the particular focus of someone choosing words carefully. The fund transfers, the dates, the account numbers. That information is mine, Leo said. I have copies. I've had copies since August. Conrad's mouth opened. Nothing came out. You are going to cut me out, Leo said. The restructuring you talked to Bianca about last Tuesday. The new equity split. 40% to the company, 40% retained by you, 20% to someone else. He paused. Not me. That's not. I have the voice memo, Leo said. 47 seconds. Kitchen table. Last Tuesday morning. The room absorbed that. Conrad turned to Miller. Whatever he said in there, he's 19 years old. He doesn't understand what he understands clearly, Miller said. And his statement has been recorded and witnessed. He looked at Conrad. Mr. Thorne, I'm going to need you to come with me now. This is no longer a request. Conrad looked at me. I hadn't moved. I hadn't spoken in 4 minutes. I had stood near the window and watched the room do exactly what I had spent 2 years arranging for it to do. Leo. Conrad's voice dropped to something I had never heard from him before, something that might have been grief if he were a different kind of man. You're my son. Leo looked at him then, directly, without flinching, without any of the things a 19-year-old boy is supposed to feel when his father is about to be escorted from a room in handcuffs. You're a liability, Leo said. He turned away. Conrad stood there for 1 full second, the second that follows, when something that cannot be taken back has been said by someone who will never take it back. Then Miller stepped forward. Mr. Thorne. The 2 officers moved to Conrad's sides, not grabbing, not aggressive. Present. The way the law stands next to a person when it has finally run out of patience. Conrad looked at the officers. He looked at the contract still open on the table. He looked at the projector screen behind him, the tower, the timeline, the numbers that had meant everything an hour ago. He picked up his phone from the table. I need to call my attorney, he said. You can do that from the station, Miller said. I want to do it now. Mr. Thorne. Conrad put the phone in his pocket. He walked toward the door. He didn't look at me as he passed. I thought he would. I had prepared for it, the last look. The accusation, the performance of a man who wants the final word. But he didn't look. He walked past me like I was furniture, like I was something that had been there all along that he had simply stopped seeing. I watched him go. Then I heard it. Upstairs, the click of a door, footsteps on the staircase. The particular sound of someone who is not trying to be quiet because they have already made their decision and see no reason to be quiet about it. Bianca appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing her coat. Her bag was over one shoulder. In her right hand, she carried a small suitcase compact, dark, the kind you take when you're not planning to come back. She looked at the room below her. She looked at Conrad being walked toward the door. She looked at Leo standing by the window. Then she looked at me, and she smiled. Bianca Reyes came down the stairs with a suitcase in her hand and the smile of someone who knows she is walking out of a burning building before it collapses. I had been watching that smile for 4 days on 24 cameras. Up close, it was exactly what I expected. Unhurried. Certain. The smile of a woman who has never once in this entire operation made a move without knowing where it would land. She reached the bottom step and looked at the room. Conrad. Leo. Miller. Me. She made her assessment in under 3 seconds. Then she walked directly to Miller. Inspector Miller. She set her suitcase down at her feet and opened her bag. She removed a manila envelope, thick sealed, labeled in her own handwriting. I have documented evidence of Conrad Thorne's extramarital affairs with 3 women. Dates, locations, hotel records, and text message exchanges. She placed it on the table. I'm prepared to testify in court. Miller looked at the envelope, then at Bianca. You've been holding this how long? 8 months, she said. Since April. Conrad had stopped moving toward the door. You. His voice came out wrong. Too thin. You were supposed to. Supposed to what? Conrad. Bianca turned to look at him. No heat. No apology. The particular flatness of someone who stopped performing 10 seconds ago. Love you, I don't do anything without a reason. You knew that. You just thought the reason was you. Conrad looked at the envelope. He looked at Bianca. He looked at the table where his marriage contract was still open to page 19. He said nothing. The front door opened. Ethan came in carrying a laptop, not rushed, not dramatic. He crossed the room, set it on the conference table, and opened it in one motion. The screen was already loaded. Mrs. Vance. He looked at me briefly, then at Miller. Inspector, there's something else you should have? Miller stepped toward the table. Miss Reyes has been in a private relationship with Leo Thorne for the past 11 months, Ethan said, concurrent with her relationship with Conrad Thorne. The room went very still. Leo straightened from the window. That's a lie. Ethan didn't look at him. He turned the laptop to face Miller. Phone records, hotel receipts from 7 separate stays across Colorado and Nevada, and 1,712 text messages exchanged between Miss Reyes and Leo Thorne between January and December of this year. Miller looked at the screen. He scrolled once. He didn't need to scroll again. Ah, Leo. Conrad's voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Not anger, not authority. Something that had been underneath both of those things for a long time and was only now exposed. You and her. Leo opened his mouth. Don't, Conrad said. One word. And for the first time all morning, Conrad Thorne sounded like a man who was done not strategically, not tactically. Simply done. He looked at his son the way a man looks at something he built that has just fallen apart in his hands. He sat down. For the first time since 7:14 that morning, Conrad Thorne sat down. Bianca looked at Leo. Her expression didn't shift. I told you not to use your real name when booking, she said. I said it twice. Leo looked at her. The cold composure he had worn all morning, the thing that had made him so effective and so frightening, was still there. But something underneath it had cracked. Not guilt. Not remorse. The particular fracture of a 19-year-old who has been outcalculated by someone he underestimated. You were using me, he said. We were using each other, Bianca said. Don't rewrite it now because it didn't go the way you planned. You said after the divorce? I said a lot of things, Bianca said. So did you. Leo looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he looked away. Ethan closed the laptop. The shell company payments to Leo, 20,000, 35,000, 50,000, were routed through Coastal Design Partners, a Nevada LLC registered through a Las Vegas law firm with no active business address, he said to Miller. The same firm Conrad used for 2 of his offshore transfers. Miller was writing. He didn't look up. Can you document the routing? Bank records, wire confirmations, and the LLC registration are in the second folder on the desktop. Miller looked up at Leo. Son, I'm going to need a follow-up statement. More detailed than the one you gave me earlier. Leo looked at Miller. Do I need an attorney present? That's your right, Miller said. I'd exercise it. Leo nodded once. He picked up his phone. He walked to the far corner of the room and made a call in a low voice. Conrad sat at the table. He had the contract in front of him. He had the manila envelope in front of him. He had the laptop in front of him. He had 40 years of work and 8 years of marriage, and one morning in which all of it had become evidence. He looked at Bianca. Why? He said. Just that. One word stripped of everything else. Bianca picked up her suitcase. She looked at him the way you look at a question you've already answered a dozen times and have no interest in answering again, because you had assets worth taking and a wife smart enough to take them back before I could, she said, and because I needed to be on the right side of that before today. She glanced at me, brief acknowledging. She made it easy. She had everything ready. She looked back at Conrad. Don't take it personally, she said. You were never the point. She walked toward the door. Miller looked at Officer Reynolds near the entrance. Reynolds stepped forward. Miss Reyes, Miller said, I'll need you to remain available for the next 72 hours. Do not leave Pitkin County. Bianca stopped. She turned. Am I being detained? You're being asked to cooperate? Miller said. There's a difference. For now. Bianca set her suitcase down. She looked at the front door. Then she sat in the chair nearest the window, the chair farthest from Conrad, and placed her bag in her lap, and said nothing more. Miller looked at me. Mrs. Vance, he said. I think it's time. I nodded. He turned to Conrad, and I heard the words I had been waiting 2 years to hear. In 30 years of finance, I learned that real punishment is never loud. It doesn't need to be loud, it only needs to be certain. Miller stood in the center of the room. He didn't reach for his cuffs immediately. He gave the room one final moment, the particular professional courtesy of a man who has seen enough of these mornings to know that what happens next cannot be undone, and who believes that the person it's happening to deserves to understand that before it does. Then he spoke. Conrad Thorne. His voice was level, the voice of a man reading from something prepared long in advance. You are under arrest for wire fraud, federal tax evasion, and unlawful conversion of Vance Thorne family trust assets. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Conrad sat at the table. He didn't stand. He didn't protest. He just sat there with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes on the contract open in front of him, page 19. The clause he had signed in the same ink as everything else, the clause he had never read. Miller nodded to Officer Hayes. Hayes stepped forward. Conrad looked up. Stand up, please, Mr. Thorne, Hayes said. Conrad stood. The cuffs went on quietly. No struggle, no outburst. Conrad Thorne, who had filled every room he'd entered for 20 years with the volume of his own certainty, stood at the head of his conference table and was handcuffed in silence. He looked at Patricia first. She looked back. She didn't speak. He looked at Ethan. Ethan held his gaze without expression. Then he looked at me, Ilara. My name in his mouth, not a greeting, not an accusation, something between the two. Ilara listened to me. I looked at him. I'm listening, Conrad. I've been listening for 8 years. I made mistakes. He said it the way men say things they believe should be enough on their own. We can fix this. There are attorneys who— You changed the locks on your own wife, I said. You threw my late husband's watch into the snow. You stood in this house for 4 days and believed you had won. I stopped. There is nothing left to fix. Conrad looked at me for a long moment. The calculation was gone. The performance was gone. What was left underneath was something I had not seen in 8 years, and perhaps had never seen Conrad Thorne without the armor of his own confidence. Smaller than I remembered. Older. He opened his mouth again. How long? He said. How long did you plan this? I looked at him steadily. From the day you stopped being worth trusting. Miller nodded. Officers Hayes and Reynolds moved to either side of Conrad and guided him forward, not roughly, not unkindly. The mechanical dignity of law enforcement doing its work. Conrad walked toward the door. He turned once at the threshold between the living room and the front hall. In the same doorway he had stood 8 years ago when we first moved into this house, and he had picked me up and carried me across it because that was what people did, and he had wanted to be the kind of man who did it. Ilara. I said nothing. He looked at me for 3 seconds. Then Officer Reynolds put a hand on his shoulder and he turned and walked through the door. Outside, the snow was still falling. Not the storm of Friday night, the thing that had driven sideways and turned the mountain road into a white corridor with no edges. This was quiet snow, the kind that comes after a storm has spent itself. Steady, indifferent. The kind of snow that covers everything equally without caring what's underneath. The patrol car was at the bottom of the front steps. I stood at the door and watched Conrad walk down those steps between 2 officers. His hands were behind him. His shoulders were not broken, not collapsed. Simply no longer performing anything. Officer Hayes opened the rear door. Conrad folded himself into the back seat. The door closed. Ethan stood beside me. He didn't touch me. He didn't speak for a moment. We both watched the car. It's over, Mom, he said, quietly. I watched the patrol car at the bottom of the steps. I watched the snow falling on the roof of it, on the driveway, on the mountain that had been white and silent and indifferent to all of it from the beginning. Almost, I said. From the side of the house, a second patrol car pulled forward. Leo came out through the side entrance with Officer Reynolds walking beside him, not cuffed, not yet. But the particular posture of someone who understands that the next several hours will determine whether or not that changes. He got into the second car without being asked. He didn't look at me. I didn't need him to. Bianca came through the side door a moment later. She was carrying her suitcase again. A plainclothes officer I hadn't seen before stood near the side gate. Miller had positioned him there before entering the house. Professional, thorough. The officer handed her a document. Sign here, he said. You're released pending cooperation. You cannot leave Pitkin County for the next 14 days. Any contact with Conrad Thorne, Leo Thorne, or any of their legal representatives must be reported to this office within 24 hours. Bianca read it. She signed it. She looked up not at me, not at the officer, at the house. One long look the way you look at something you almost had. Then she walked to her car and drove away without looking back. Patricia stepped up beside me. She put her hand on my shoulder briefly, lightly. The gesture of a woman who has known me long enough to know I don't need more than that. It's done, she said. The divorce proceedings start Monday, I said. I have everything ready. She paused. Ilara, it's done. I nodded. I stood at the front door until the patrol car carrying Conrad cleared the bottom curve of the mountain road and disappeared behind the tree line. Then I turned around. I looked at the house. $14.2 million of glass and stone and silence. The house I had paid for. The house that carried my name on the deed. The house Conrad had believed he had taken from me on a Friday night with a changed lock code and a stack of papers slid across an anniversary dinner table. I walked forward. Through the front door. For the first time in 4 days, I entered my own home through the front entrance, not the garage passage, not the hidden corridor, not the panic room door. The front door. I stepped inside. I turned around. And I closed it. Ethan stayed with me that evening. We sat in front of the fireplace with 2 cups of coffee and said nothing for a long time. Outside, the snow had stopped. The fire was the only sound in the house. Not the creak of footsteps on the floor above. Not the murmur of a television Conrad kept on low in the master bedroom. Not the particular silence that follows someone else's presence, the kind of silence that reminds you constantly that you are not alone, even when no one is speaking. Just the fire, just the house. Mine. Ethan had his cup in both hands. He was looking at the fire the way he had looked at things since he was small, steadily without rushing to a conclusion. He got that from me. I had always been quietly glad he did. Was there anything, he said, that didn't go according to your plan? I thought about it. I gave it the honest consideration it deserved. Leo moved faster than I expected, I said. I thought he would wait until Conrad was convicted before turning. I thought he'd need the certainty first. He didn't want to risk being caught in the same net. No, he's smarter than Conrad in that way. Conrad always believed he could talk his way out. Leo knew when to cut the rope. I turned my cup in my hands. I had contingencies prepared in case Leo stayed loyal through the morning. We didn't need them. Ethan nodded. And Bianca? Exactly what I expected. You knew she'd bring the evidence against Conrad. I knew she'd been collecting it, I said. A woman like Bianca doesn't invest 11 months in 2 men simultaneously without building an exit strategy. She was always going to walk out of this with something. I just made sure the timing worked in our favor. Ethan was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted. A log settled. And Marcus Webb deserved to have his work acknowledged, I said. That was never a tactic. That was a debt. Ethan set his cup down on the low table between us. Mom. He said it the way he said things when he was about to ask the question that mattered. I had known that particular tone for 32 years. When did you actually start planning all of this? I looked into my coffee. The question deserved the honest answer, not the short version, the real one. The day you called me from Denver, I said. 2 years ago. Ethan didn't speak. I gave him 2 years, Ethan. 2 full years to prove I was wrong about what you told me, to come to me, to stop, to become the man I thought I had married. I paused. He used every single day of those 2 years to prove I was right. The fire, the silence. So the panic room, Ethan said slowly. Silas, the IRS flag, Patricia and the UV clause, Ryan Holt. All of it was in place before Conrad ever picked up those divorce papers. How long before? The panic room was completed 14 months ago, I said. The IRS flag was filed 18 months ago through Patricia's office. The UV clause was drafted and inserted into the original contract 8 years ago, the week before we signed. Ethan looked at me. 8 years ago. I had good legal counsel even then, I said. And I had learned in 30 years of finance never to enter a contract without an exit clause the other party doesn't know about. Ethan sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, not in disbelief, I thought. In recalibration. The way a person looks when they are rearranging what they thought they knew into the shape of what is actually true. The anniversary dinner, he said. That night, he thought he was making his move. I said. He had been rehearsing it for months. The papers, the lock, the phone call to the locksmith, Bianca standing in the driveway. I looked at the fire. He thought he was the one who had chosen the moment. But you had already chosen it. I had given him a window, I said. A specific window. The trust fund was flagged. The UV clause had a 10-year limit. We were at year 8. Ryan's NDA exclusivity agreement expired in December. Marcus's NDA expired in September. I let that sit. Everything had to happen in December 2024. Conrad simply obliged. Ethan was quiet for a long time. The fire was lower now. Neither of us moved to add a log. He never had a single chance, Ethan said, quietly. Not a question. I looked at my son. For the first time in the entirety of 4 days, in the entirety of 2 years, I smiled. Not the controlled expression I had worn through every camera feed and every legal document and every exchange in that living room this morning. Something smaller, something that belonged only to this room, this fire, this conversation. He had every chance, I said. 2 years of them. Every morning he woke up in this house, he had a choice. He chose consistently. I looked back at the fire. I simply made sure that when he finally made the last choice, everything was ready. Ethan picked up his cup again. He held it without drinking. "Does it feel the way you thought it would?" he said. I considered that. "It feels quieter," I said. "I thought there would be more." More what? More of something. Relief. Satisfaction. I don't know. I looked at the window. Outside, the mountain was white and still, and the sky had cleared to the particular dark blue of a December night after snow. It mostly just feels finished. Is that enough? Yes, I said. I think that's exactly enough. Ethan left an hour later. He hugged me at the door briefly, firmly, the hug of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally set it down. I held on a moment longer than usual. "Call me tomorrow," I said. "First thing," he said. I watched him drive down the mountain road. The same road I had driven 4 nights ago with a suitcase in the back seat and a black case in the trunk, and a plan that had been 2 years in the making moving into its final hours. I closed the front door. I stood in the front hall of my house. I sat back down in front of the fire alone for a while after that, looking at the window. The mountain white in the darkness. 8 years of marriage, 2 years of preparation, 4 days of execution, and at the end of it, silence. Not the silence of someone who is lost, not the silence of a house that belongs to someone else, or a life that has been handed to you by someone else's permission, or a woman standing in the snow outside her own front door with a suitcase that was never meant to go anywhere. The silence of someone who has finished what they came to do. I picked up my coffee cup. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. I've told you a family drama story, but what I haven't told you is the part I'm least proud of. I waited 2 years. I watched, I planned, and I won. But winning quietly doesn't mean you walk away without scars. There were nights in that panic room when I asked God whether patience and strategy could ever truly be the same thing as justice. I still don't have a clean answer, so here's what I want to say to anyone listening. Don't do what I did. Don't let 8 years pass before you trust what you already know. Don't confuse silence with strength. Sometimes silence is just fear wearing a better coat. If you are in a marriage where you feel yourself disappearing, say something. Leave. Ask for help. You don't need a panic room and 2 years of carefully documented evidence. You need one honest conversation with yourself first. Family revenge stories are satisfying to hear. I understand why people are drawn to them. But underneath every family drama story like mine is a person who wished it never had to go this far. The real victory wasn't the contract, the handcuffs, or the house. It was the morning I stopped waiting for someone else to decide my worth. These family revenge stories don't begin with courtrooms and strategy. They begin with one small moment when someone you trusted chose themselves over you, and you stayed silent one day too long. That's the only opinion I'll offer. Know what belongs to you, and never apologize for reclaiming it. And if this family drama story made you feel something, that feeling belongs to you too. If you found yourself in these words, leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have done differently. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you want to be here when the next story begins, subscribe. I'll be waiting. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. One final note: the stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted for the purpose of reflection and honest conversation. If that's not what you're looking for, no judgment. Simply close this and find something that serves you better today. That choice is always yours.
That's all for the story today. I appreciate you watching. See you again soon.